Welcome to PC Hardware Therapy and to today's gaming PC build inside the SilverStone Sugo14 Mini ITX case. I've recently done an unboxing and teardown of this case, so if you're interested, then please go and check out that video. I'll put a link here as a card and also in the description. One of the primary reasons of getting this case was to be able to put a triple slot GPU together with the possibility to install a large CPU cooler. However, in today's video, we're just going to be installing the PC components that came straight out of my previous Mini ITX case so that we can do an apples to apples comparison of the thermals and the acoustics. Another video will be coming up where I'll be installing the large CPU cooler and a full-size graphics card. If you don't want to miss that video, be sure to subscribe to this channel and click on that notification bell. Now without further ado, let's look at the components. Today we'll be installing an AMD Ryzen 5 3600 CPU over Asus ROG Strix B450i gaming motherboard with 16GB Patriot DDR4 memory running at 3600 MHz, two NVMe SSDs, one 512 and one 2TB XPG SX 8200 Pros, and to support the backup we will be installing a 500GB 7200 RPM 2.5-inch hard drive. For the graphics we will be installing GTX 970 Mini ITX, and in the power supply area we will have Cooler Master V650 ATX semi-modular PSU. For the cooling we will install this Noctua NF-A14 PWM 140mm fan. Now let's prep the case by removing all the side panels and also the top and bottom panels. Let's also remove these panels. This is the top fan panel and the side panel. Then we can decide where to put our 140mm fan. The case comes with a rear 120mm fan in the back set as exhaust, but for my setup I will install a 140mm fan as an intake from the back, and the included 120mm fan I will put it in the top panel as an exhaust so that fresh air comes from the back and hot air goes out from the top. The case fan comes with a 3-pin connector, as you can see here. Here is the 140mm Noctua fan we will be installing. Now in order to see which side the fan pushes air to, there is usually an arrow to indicate the direction, which in this case is right over here. So in our case this arrow has to face towards the motherboard. To install the 140mm fan, we must include some washers, and this Noctua fan actually comes with a whole box full of washers. It's like a rubber in the corners that you can fit in. It comes in all these different colors, but frankly for this video I'll be using just the black ones, so you can fit them like so. It's especially useful when you're going to be installing the fan like this, because it can give you some space between the wire mesh and the fan. Actually, before installing the fan, let's put the IO shield. There we go. Installing the fan once again. Now it's always best to first mount your CPU outside the system. So in this case I'm using the box as a base, and I have installed the CPU already, and I have hooked on the power for the fan. Now let's install the RAM. In this particular motherboard the two slots don't open from this side, so we have to kind of put it in and slide it to the left. Well, just put it in, to be honest, and it should click into place like so. Now I have also installed the SSDs. To save time, I have installed one 512 SSD over here and the 2 TB SSD at the back. Now before we put the motherboard in, it's always good to connect the front panel connectors already, because once the case is in, it will be very difficult to reach those spots. Let's have a closer look at these front panel connectors and where they will go. This is the USB 3 connector. Let's already connect this one here. Some of these cables are not long enough that I can fit them really outside the case. Okay, let's have another go. Now I have the manual here. You really need a manual for this. You cannot see where these components. In fact, I'm gonna remove this RAM so it becomes just a bit easier to install these front panel connectors here. Hard drive LED is like so. Positive is at the bottom. Then we have power button. I know there was a reset button somewhere. That's the reset button. For a reset button there is no positive or negative. Then we've got the power button, which is right opposite the reset button. Suppose you can't see at this point. Trust me, neither can I. Okay, and then we've got the LEDs, power LEDs. Now we've got positive and negative, and it doesn't say on the manual which one is positive, but usually it's the one outside that's always the positive. Let's go with that. Let's get the negative one in first. Okay, I've got this USB. You see what they have done with the USB? Not sure if it's visible. Usually when you have two USB 2.0 ports, it's a connector with two sets of pins. Here we have only a single one, so I need to match it pin by pin into this slot. It should go like this. Like before, we've got the USB 3 connector. That's the simplest one. And now we need to put in the HD audio connector. It's not long enough, so I'll put that in once we have our board in. If I look closely, these are already embedded mounts, so you don't need to actually attach any mounts to this case, which is a nice touch, because if you have mounts and you tighten your bolts on the motherboard a little bit too hard, then the mounts come off together with the motherboard. So let's now install the motherboard inside this case. Now I chose to install this fan earlier. I think it's not a very good idea on my part. I should have done that afterwards. Let's see if I can somehow get the board in without removing this fan. I think I will remove this fan. It's coming in the way. That's more like it. Let's see if things align on this side. Yes, they do. Let's turn over the case and install screws. Okay, so our motherboard is installed. Let's actually get rid of the front panel as well. It's connected with two screws. Since we are only going to install one 3.5 inch drive, so we can actually, let's just install it here. Now we installed the 2.5 inch drive in the front of the case here, and I'm already trying to route the SATA cable so that it's easier in the end. Maybe it's easier that I remove this first and install my cables. Even install the power cable for this drive and already route it from here. Now let's see how easily I can slide this in. That's tight enough. Yeah, it's not going anywhere. Let's route the SATA cable. Let us connect it already. We can also go ahead and connect this audio cable for HD audio. That one goes there like so. And let's install our SATA cable as well, like so. Okay, our SATA cable is connected. why don't we slide our power supply in, because some of these connectors need to go in the power supply. How to do that? I think we have to slide the power supply from here. So some cables need to be out of the way before we do that. And we'll keep the orientation of the fan downwards. The power supply would actually go like this. Connect this included power, the router. Let's attach it with a screw. So there's our power supply installed. Now, one of the downsides of having a routed cable is that you are not having this on-off switch at the back of the case, which can be handy if you want to swap components. Now, in order to do that, you have to first remove the top panel and then switch it off. On this side, we have to route all these cables. This cable needs to be routed here. This is a SATA power cable. Thankfully, there is some room here to do just that. We need to connect the CPU connector. So I've installed the power supply. At this point, I would like to stick in the RAM as well. Let's stick the RAM in. So the RAM is in. Let's get the graphics card in as well. Shall we do that, or the fan? Let's install the fan first. Now it's time to install the GPU. So we'll be needing 2 of these slots. I only need to remove this screw which is holding this plate. Oh, it sits nicely. Since the graphics card is not that big, we won't be needing this extendable GPU bracket because it's already quite short. So let's get this one in and install our bracket. Oops. Let's get the screw in first. Okay, so our GPU is installed. We just have to connect the power. So our GPU is completely installed and I have given it the power by routing the PCI Express cable from below the power supply. Now it must be said that there is a lot of room below the power supply to actually shove in a lot of cables. As you will see here, there's a lot of room. So you can definitely use semi-modular power supplies with this case. Now our build is now looking near complete. We have installed the fan, but we haven't connected it. There is a fan connector right here. There are 2 connectors, one for AIO and one for the fan. Since I want to have also a top mounted fan for exhaust, which I'll be installing here, I will make use of this split connector with which we can actually power 2 fans. So let's install the included Cooler Master fan onto this plate as an exhaust. So it has to be like this. Now it's time to plug in the fans with this split connector. Now it's time to install some feet. The case comes with two different kinds of feet, but I would like to go with these taller ones. If you want to check out what the other kind of feet come with this case, then do check out the other unboxing video, to which I will put a link in the description. With that, our gaming build inside the Sugo14 is complete and we are ready to switch it on for the first time. Moment of truth. So it switches on, power light comes on, and where is the hard drive LED? It's here. If you look closely, you will see there is a blinking of a light here. That concludes our build of the Sugo14. With that, we now come to the part you might be most interested in. How does this case perform in thermals and acoustics? As you have seen, we have two cooling fans installed in this case. The 140 mm fan is bringing in fresh air from the rear of the case, and the 120 mm fan exhausts the hot air out from the top. Let us compare that to the previous Mini ITX case, the SilverStone CAI, which had the same components with the 140 mm fan installed at the bottom of the case bringing in fresh air, and a similar 120 mm fan mounted at the top of the case exhausting air out. I also did a review of that case, so if you're interested, I'll put a link to that video on screen and in the description. Let's have a look at the results. For this test, I recorded temps and sound levels in 4 different tests with all the side panels closed and the sound measurements taken at a distance of 10 centimeters away from the GPU facing the side panel of the case. At idle, the case performed quite well, not only lowering the CPU and GPU temperatures but also the acoustics from 48 decibels to just 43. This is mainly due to the fact that in the case of Sugo14, the CPU gets fresh air at its disposal from the rear 140 mm fan, and in the case of SilverStone, the CPU receives hotter air from the bottom mounted 140 mm fan, which is first consumed by the GPU. Coming to the CPU stress test done using Prime 95 for 15 minutes, as you can see in both cases, the included AMD Wraith Stealth CPU cooler struggles to keep the temperatures in check and avoid thermal throttling of the CPU. Clearly, the bottleneck here is the CPU cooler. GPU stress test was done using Firma running for 15 minutes, truly reveals what this case shines at. In the SilverStone case, the GPU temps hit the thermal limit of 80 degrees Celsius, but Sugo14 managed to keep those temperatures in check. This is even with the fact that GPU in case of Sugo14 has to intake its own air via the side panel, while in the case of SilverStone there was a 140 mm fan feeding the GPU with some fresh air. Also look at the huge difference in the CPU temperatures. This is because of the fact that in the case of SilverStone, the CPU gets preheated air from the GPU, and even at this lower CPU usage scenario, the CPU temperatures really soar high. This test actually represents to some extent what you could expect in a gaming scenario, and here the Sugo14 shines, keeping the CPU temps at 60 degrees Celsius. As a result of this, the sound level is also 5 decibels lower in this test. Coming to the combined test, here both Prime 95 and Firma are run at the same time and measurements are taken after 15 minutes. CPU in both cases soars to its maximum thermal temperature, which is mainly due to the limiting factor of the CPU cooler. However, there is a clear difference of 6 degrees Celsius in GPU temps, the same that was in the GPU stress test, making the Sugo14 a clear winner here. It also shows that the heat in the CPU and GPU compartments do not interfere with each other that much. In these tests, I noticed that part of the Sugo14 case where the GPU is housed became quite hot, and there is no place to put a fan on the side panel next to the GPU. This got me thinking, what if we could turn the top fan from an exhaust also to an intake and have a complete positive pressure inside the case? There are enough perforated side panel holes to get all the air out of the case, and I was surprised with the result. At idle, there wasn't much difference in the CPU temperatures, but you begin to notice that the GPU temperatures became even cooler.
This can also be seen in the CPU stress test, where the GPU temps reduce from 39 degrees Celsius to 34, which really takes us to the results of the GPU stress test itself. Have a look at this. The GPU temperatures are reduced by 4 degrees from 74 degrees to 70, while the CPU temps remain unchanged. As a result, the sound level was also much quieter at 48 decibels, and this trend continued in the combined stress test, where the GPU was once again 3 degrees cooler and the whole setup was 3 decibels quieter. There are so many cooling possibilities in the Sugo 14 that I simply did not have the time to evaluate in this video. For example, we haven't even utilized the right side panel, which can house up to two 120mm or two 140mm fans. Also, I am very much interested on how this case will perform in a negative pressure scenario where both fans are exhausting air out. At least I can foresee that in that scenario the GPU will benefit the most. Clearly, first thing would be to install an aftermarket cooler and run some more tests, but that will be for another video. To conclude, it was so easy to build a Mini ITX gaming PC in this case. Granted that at 19.5 liters this is not the smallest Mini ITX case, but for its size you can really fit in a top-end PC inside of it. Routing cables was also not an issue. There's quite some room, especially under the power supply, to tuck cables. On thermals and acoustics, the performance is quite good and the case offers plenty of options to install cooling fans and radiators. If you're looking to build a Mini ITX case which offers flexibility, then I can highly recommend this case. This was our gaming PC build inside the SilverStone Sugo14 Mini ITX case. If you like this video, then press the like button, and if you would like to be notified on the upcoming video where I'll be installing a CPU cooler or additional fans, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. See you in the next one. Bye for now.